12 armed men crashed a wedding in broad daylight. No masks, no warnings, just weapons and the kind of arrogance that comes from never being stopped before. They took the bride, a 4-star general's only daughter, still wearing her veil. They fired 2 rounds into the air and told everyone else to stay down or die. The guests dropped. The security detail froze. And the general himself, a man who had commanded 40,000 soldiers across 3 continents, stood helpless at the altar watching his daughter get pulled through the rear gate. What no one in that venue knew was that one of the servers refilling water glasses at table 7 had arrived 4 hours early, requested the seat nearest the eastern window, and hadn't touched a single tray of food since. She wasn't serving drinks. She was counting exits. Now, before we show you the exact moment she stepped out of that catering uniform, what she carried underneath it, and a single sentence she said when the hostage negotiators finally arrived and asked who had cleared the perimeter, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Hit subscribe and tap the bell icon, because this story doesn't end with a rescue. It ends with a lesson nobody in that room will ever forget. Staff Sergeant Renata Cole had been awake for 31 hours when the mission brief landed on her tablet. She was sitting in the back of a military transport somewhere over the Atlantic, boots unlaced, MRE half-eaten on the seat beside her. The screen glowed blue against the cabin dark. She read the brief once fast. Then she read it again slowly, the way she read everything that had bodies attached to it. Target, Celeste Hargrove. Age, 27. Daughter of General Marcus Hargrove, Supreme Allied Commander Europe, NATO. Wedding ceremony scheduled 1,100 hours local time, Villa Escale, southern France. Threat intelligence suggested a credible extraction attempt by a Serbian paramilitary group operating under a contracted network connected to 3 previous high-value kidnappings across the continent. All 3 victims recovered, 2 alive, 1 in a box. She stared at the photo of the bride. Dark eyes, wide smile, completely unaware. Then she scrolled to her own assignment. Lone Overwatch. Civilian cover. No active intervention unless situation deteriorates beyond security capacity. She read the phrase 3 times. Beyond security capacity. Someone in an office somewhere had decided the assigned 12-person protection detail would be sufficient. Someone had run the numbers, filed the paperwork, and checked the box that said this was a manageable risk, that someone had probably never been inside a kill corridor. Renata closed the tablet, finished the MRE, and relaced her boots. She had her own numbers, and they told a different story. Villa Escale sat on a limestone ridge above the Var Valley. Lavender fields on 3 sides. Steep drop to the river on the 4th. The kind of place that looked like a painting and thought like a fortress, though not intentionally. Just geography, the sort of terrain that made security planners comfortable and made Renata's jaw tighten the moment she saw the satellite image. Too many hard corners, too many blind spots in the garden walls. 1 road in, 1 road out, and a rear service gate that the catering company used 4 times a day. She arrived the morning before the wedding dressed in flat shoes and a cream linen blouse. Clipboard in hand, an ID badge clipped above her left pocket that identified her as a logistics coordinator for the catering firm. Her French was functional. Her smile was practiced. The venue manager showed her everything without being asked twice. By early afternoon, she had walked every square meter of the property, noted every sight line from every window, paced the distance from the rear garden to the service road 3 times, and identified 2 positions, 1 on the east terrace roofline, 1 inside the bell tower of the adjacent chapel, for which a single shooter could cover the entire event space and the gate. She chose the bell tower. The chapel caretaker found her there at dusk, standing at the window, fingers on the stone sill, looking out across the valley like she was deciding something. "You are with the caterers?" he asked. She turned with a smile warm enough to disarm and replied that she was checking the acoustic suitability for the string quartet. The caretaker nodded, satisfied, and went back to polishing the pews. She went back to memorizing distance markers. The wedding morning broke clear and still. By 9, the venue was alive. Florists threading garlands through iron railings. A string quartet warming up under a white awning. Catering staff in pale gray uniforms moving with the controlled urgency of people who had done this 100 times. Guests arriving in cars and silk dresses and too much cologne. Renata was at table 7 by 08:45, pouring water, keeping her back straight and her movements unhurried. Beneath the gray catering uniform, she wore a low-profile tactical vest, custom-fitted, so thin that the drape of the fabric over it looked like nothing more than a well-fed woman in a slightly stiff outfit. The rifle was not on her person. It was in a locked guitar case in the trunk of a gray hatchback parked beside the chapel, for minutes from her current position. 12 minutes from now, she would find a reason to leave table 7, cross the garden, unlock that case, and be in position before the ceremony began. That was the plan. The plan lasted until 09:11, when the first SUV rolled through the service gate. She saw it before anyone else did. Not the vehicle itself. The gate was blocked from her angle by a stone planter, but the reaction it caused in the estate's one external security guard, a young Frenchman in a dark suit who straightened, frowned, reached for his radio, and then went very still in the way men went still when something heavier than they were was pointed at them. Renata set down the water pitcher. The second SUV came through the gate 7 seconds later, and then the third. By the time the first gunman stepped into the garden, she was already moving. 12 men. She counted them in 3 seconds. 2 stayed at the gate. 3 fanned across the garden perimeter. 4 advanced on the ceremony space, weapons up, moving in the practiced overlap pattern of men who had done this before and expected to do it again. The last 3 went straight for the front of the altar. The screaming started immediately. Chairs scraped. Women grabbed children. Men who had been soldiers once and had forgotten what that felt like suddenly remembered. Celeste Hargrove was standing at the altar in ivory silk and a cathedral veil that caught the morning light like something out of a painting. Her groom reached for her. One of the gunmen hit him across the face with a forearm so efficient it was almost bored. He dropped. The bride did not scream. She looked at the man holding her arm with the same steady dark eyes from the photograph, and then she looked at her father. General Hargrove stood 6 feet away in his dress uniform, for stars on his shoulders, a military career spanning 34 years, and absolutely nothing in his hands. He had been told to leave his weapon at the hotel. He looked at his daughter. She looked at him. Neither spoke, but something passed between them in that look. The acknowledgement of a terrible helplessness. The understanding that all the rank in the world meant nothing with a barrel to your head and your child in someone else's hands. The lead gunman was a large man with a close-shaved jaw and the flat eyes of someone who had reduced people to problems a long time ago. He spoke into a phone in rapid Serbian, grabbed the bride's wrist, and began pulling her toward the rear gate. Nobody moved. Nobody except Renata, who was already out of the garden. She covered the distance to the chapel in 73 seconds. Not running, not slow. The specific pace of a woman who knew exactly where she was going and didn't want to appear to know that. She unlocked the hatchback, opened the guitar case, and began assembling the rifle with the automatic certainty of muscle memory that operated independently of fear. She had built this particular configuration 800 times. The 800th time felt exactly like the first. Her hands did not shake. They never did. That wasn't because she was fearless. It was because she had been through the thing that burned fear off, the same way fire burned moisture out of wood until only the structure remained. She had been 24 years old, deployed in the Sahel, lying in 45-degree heat on a rooftop for 9 hours waiting for confirmation on a target that was pulling children through a checkpoint as shields. She had made the shot at 1,100 meters through crosswind with a 3-second window and less certainty than she had ever operated with in her life. And afterward, on the helicopter home, she had sat in the vibration of the rotors and felt every emotion she would never name empty out of her, replaced by something else. Something quieter and more durable. After that, assembling a rifle was just assembling a rifle. She moved to the bell tower. From the east window of the chapel, with the morning light sitting at the perfect angle, she could see the entire rear garden and the service road beyond the gate. The gate was 340 meters away. The lead gunman was at 360. The bride was between them, slightly left, partially shielded by his body. The two gate guards stood at 330 and 345. Clear shots, both. She identified four more in the garden perimeter, at 250, 270, 315, and 290. The remaining two she couldn't see, but had last clocked near the front entrance. She ran the sequence in her head the way she had always run sequences. Not imagining the outcome, but mapping the order. Not emotion, just geometry. If she took the gate guards first, the perimeter would close inward. If she took the perimeter first, the gate guards would move the bride. If she waited for the bride to clear the gate, which is what they were already doing, walking her toward it, the margin collapsed to seconds, and the shot on the lead gunman went from difficult to impossible with civilian vehicles on the service road. She had 3 minutes before Celeste Hargrove disappeared through that gate and into a vehicle with blacked-out windows. She settled her breathing, exhaled slow, let her pulse drop to the place where time moved differently. The crosswind was negligible. The light was clean. The distance was manageable. She made her decision. The first shot was at 0924 hours. The gate guard on the left dropped before anyone in the garden understood that the sound they'd heard wasn't a vehicle backfiring. The second gate guard turned toward his fallen partner, which was the wrong direction, and he was down before he finished turning. The screaming had started again inside the garden. Different screaming than before. The screaming of people who didn't know where the shots were coming from. The gunmen in the perimeter did know. They began moving immediately, pulling inward toward the main group, which is exactly what she had expected them to do. Consolidating was instinct. It was also a mistake. It brought all four of them into her primary sight line within 12 seconds. She worked efficiently. No flourish, no hesitation, no wasted motion. Each shot placed with the deliberateness of a surgeon making an incision. She was not ending lives with enthusiasm. She was removing obstacles with precision. There was a difference, and she had understood it since the Sahel. By 0926, she had placed 6 rounds. For perimeter guards down, both gate guards down. The garden had fractured into chaos, guests running in every direction. The security detail finally mobilizing, though they were still 40 seconds from understanding where the fire was coming from. The lead gunman understood fastest. He pulled Celeste hard against him and began moving laterally rather than straight for the gate, using the bride as a shield, keeping his body behind hers with the calculated efficiency of a man who had used people as shields before. Renata tracked him. The geometry had changed. The angle had tightened. The margin had gone from 3 minutes to approximately 30 seconds before he reached a stone wall that would break her sight line completely. She did not rush. Rushing was how you missed. Rushing was how you hit the wrong person. She had learned that truth not from training manuals, but from one perfect, terrible second of almost in the Sahel when she had taken a breath too fast and the barrel had drifted 2 millimeters left and the window had closed. And she had lain on that rooftop with her face in the dust, understanding exactly what 2 millimeters could cost. She waited. The lead gunman moved left. He moved left because the wall was to his right and instinct pushed you away from obstacles. She had known he would move left. She had been waiting for him to move left for the last 11 seconds. In the half second that his body separated from Celeste's, just enough, just barely, she took the shot. Celeste Hargrove stumbled forward as the grip on her arm released. She looked behind her. The man who had been holding her was on the ground. She looked at her own arm, at the white silk sleeve, at her own uninjured hand. She understood, slowly, that she was standing alone. Around her, the garden had become a different kind of chaos. Security personnel were moving in from the front entrance, weapons drawn. The remaining gunmen, the 2 she hadn't yet accounted for, the ones who had been near the front of the venue, were being taken down by the security detail in a coordinated rush that told her they had finally gotten organized. General Hargrove crossed the garden in 7 seconds. He reached his daughter, put both hands on her face, checked her eyes the way soldiers checked eyes when they needed to know if a person was still present. She was present. She nodded once. He pulled her close and held on with the kind of grip that had nothing to do with rank. Nobody in the garden knew where the shots had come from. Not yet. The security detail was calling in positions, sweeping the perimeter, trying to reconstruct a timeline that hadn't made sense from the moment it started. In the bell tower, Renata began breaking down the rifle with the same unhurried precision she had used to build it. Her hands did not shake. Her breathing had already returned to baseline. She thought about the brief on the tablet. Lone Overwatch. No active intervention unless situation deteriorates beyond security capacity. 12 gunmen against a frozen security detail, and a general with empty hands, and a bride in a white veil had seemed like a situation that qualified. She snapped the case shut and walked back down the chapel stairs. They found her at table 7. She had returned the catering uniform, refilled 2 water pitchers, and was standing near the window when a lead French investigator pushed through the garden doors with 2 gendarmes and a face that looked like a man trying to reassemble a puzzle while the pieces were still moving. He scanned the room. His eyes landed on her. "You were here?" he asked. "During the incident?" "I was working," she said. He looked at her water pitcher, her uniform, her completely calm expression. He looked at the dried grass on her right knee that she hadn't noticed. He looked at the small abrasion on the webbing of her right thumb that came from a specific type of recoil management no caterer had reason to know. He was a good investigator. It took him about 4 seconds. "Who are you actually?" he asked. She set down the pitcher and unclipped the badge above her pocket. Turned around. Let him read the other side. He read it twice. The color changed in his face. Not fear exactly. More like the feeling of standing near something much larger than you'd expected and only just understanding the actual scale of it. He took a breath. "You were the Overwatch." She nodded. "The perimeter shots, all 6. That was you." She said nothing. He looked toward the rear garden where the forensic team was already marking positions. He looked back at her. His voice dropped. "You had a window of what? 30 seconds on the primary target." She didn't answer that either. He clicked his pen, folded his notebook, seemed to make a decision about what kind of report he was going to write. Then he said quietly, "Are you going to tell me which agency sent you?" She picked up the water pitcher. "The kind that doesn't put its name on the brief," she said. "The hostage negotiators arrived 40 minutes after the incident was resolved. They pulled up in 2 vehicles with blue flashers and a coordinated energy that was entirely misplaced, like a fire crew arriving with hoses at a building that was already just smoke and silence. Their team lead was a compact man named Fournier who had managed 11 hostage situations across 4 countries and wore his experience the way some men wore expensive watches, visibly, continuously, in the hope that it would prompt questions. He walked through the garden with the assessment eyes of a professional, cataloging positions, counting markers, doing the calculation that ended at an answer he couldn't quite believe. He found Renata near the east terrace speaking quietly with General Hargrove. The general's daughter was seated nearby, wrapped in a white blanket someone had found, her cathedral veil still in her hair, her groom's hand in both of hers, an ice pack against his face. Fournier looked at the forensic markers, looked at the distance indicators, looked at Renata. "You're the shooter?" he asked. She looked at him without expression. "Who cleared the perimeter?" He tried again. Still nothing. He was a patient man. He tried a 3rd time. "The primary target," he said carefully. "That was a moving shot, partial obstruction, inside 25 seconds from initial engagement to final placement. That's," he paused, doing the math in real time. "That's not a tactical response shot. That's a sniper operation." She tilted her head slightly, like someone deciding whether a question was worth answering. "The difference between tactical response and sniper operation," she said, "is whether you thought before you pulled the trigger." Fournier absorbed that. Then he looked at General Hargrove. The general had the face of a man who had spent his career making decisions about other people's daughters in other people's dangerous places, and who is only now standing in a French lavender garden with his own daughter 20 feet away, fully understanding what that arithmetic actually cost. He looked at Renata. "You were the one I didn't know about," he said. She met his eyes. "That's usually how it works." He exhaled, long and slow, the kind of breath that had a lot of years in it. "I write the orders," he said quietly. "I don't always know who gets assigned underneath them." She nodded once. "That's how you'd want it, sir." He looked toward his daughter. the ice pack on his son-in-law's face, the gendarmes at the gate, the lavender, improbably, still purple and unhurried in the morning sun. There's a commendation in this, he said. She shook her head. There's a debrief in this. Then I go back in the rotation. He studied her for a long moment with the particular expression of a man who had ordered people into impossible places and watched them come back changed, or not come back at all, and who was trying to understand what kind of person left a bell tower after taking 6 shots to go refill water glasses at table 7. She answered the unspoken question before he could ask it. The job was Overwatch, she said. The job doesn't change because the moment got louder. He had nothing to answer that with. She walked back to the table, picked up the water pitcher, and continued filling glasses. The French news ran the story on the evening broadcast as a thwarted kidnapping by a Serbian organized crime. 2 security personnel dead at the gate having engaged the suspects. It was accurate in the way that official summaries were always accurate. Technically correct, substantially incomplete, and designed to leave certain questions permanently unanswered. In the catering firm's logistics file, a coordinator named Renata had been clocked in at 0845 and clocked out at 11:15. Her paperwork was perfect. Her tip was reasonable. 3 of the other staff said she had been quiet and professional and that they hadn't really gotten a good look at her face. In the chapel, the bell tower window showed no trace. Someone had been careful. Fournier submitted his report that evening from a cafe table overlooking the Var Valley. He wrote 7 pages. On page 4, he included a paragraph noting the exceptional positioning, timing, and execution of an unknown asset operating under civilian cover, and he attributed the resolution of the incident to the coordinated response of the assigned security detail and the extraordinary competence of said asset, identity unconfirmed. He paused over that last phrase for a long time. Then he left it in, because some things deserved to be in the record even if the record was classified, even if the person it described would never read it, even if the only people who would ever know were the 11 guests who'd been at table 7 and had noticed that the woman pouring their water never once looked nervous. In the corner booth of a small restaurant 3 kilometers from the villa, Renata ate the meal she hadn't been able to eat at the wedding. Chicken, roasted potatoes, a glass of water. She read a report on her tablet. Not about the incident, about the next one. Her hands were clean. Her food was getting cold. She ate without rushing, finished everything on the plate, left exact change, and walked out into the evening air where the sky was doing something vivid above the valley, and the lavender was dark now, and the ridge caught the last of the light like the edge of something that would be here long after the noise was over. She didn't think about the shots. She thought about the bride's face when she understood she was standing alone. That moment, the realization that the thing holding you back had released, that you were still intact, that the world had shifted in your favor for no reason you yet understood. That was the only part of the work that stayed with her. Not the mechanics, not the aftermath, not the commendations she declined and the reports she didn't read. Just that face, that specific and irreplaceable moment of a person discovering they were still here. She carried it the same way she carried all of them, quietly, without ceremony, the way you carried things that mattered too much for noise. For days later, at a different briefing in a building with no windows, a handler in civilian dress slid a new tablet across a table toward her. She read it once, fast, then again slow. 3rd assignment this month, she said. He shrugged. You have a talent for getting results in situations that weren't supposed to need results. She looked at the screen. New name, new photo, new timeline. How many exits? She asked. He smiled without warmth. You always ask that first. She closed the tablet. It's always the first thing worth knowing. She slid it back, picked up her coffee, drank it standing, the way she drank everything, without ceremony, without performance, just the actual act of consuming something useful before moving toward the next necessary thing. Talent, she said, isn't the right word. He raised an eyebrow. She set the coffee down. Talent means it comes easy. None of this comes easy. She picked up the tablet, stood, and walked toward the door, the same unhurried pace she used everywhere, the pace of a woman who knew exactly where she was going and didn't need to announce it. At the door, she stopped. You want to know what I felt in that bell tower? She asked, not turning around. He said nothing, which was an answer. The same thing I felt in the Sahel. The same thing I felt in Mogadishu. The same thing I feel every time. She opened the door. The weight of knowing that someone will go home tonight who might not have. And then she was gone. No fanfare. No announcement. Just the sound of boots on a corridor floor getting quieter and then silent, the way all the things that mattered most always did. And somewhere in southern France, in a white dress that had lavender pollen on the hem from the garden, a woman who had looked into the face of something unforgivable and come through the other side was sitting in the evening with her husband's hand in hers, watching the sky change over the valley, and wondering about the catering coordinator who had looked at her from across the garden with eyes that were already somewhere else. She would think about those eyes for years. She would never know the name that belonged to them. Some people do their best work that way. Would you have stayed in the shadows until the moment was right? Or would you have moved the second you saw them take her? Do you think there's a kind of courage that asks nothing for the crowd? No recognition, no applause, just the work done clean and the results standing upright? Drop your answers in the comments. We read every single one. Then tap the like button, hit subscribe, and turn on the bell icon so you never miss the next mission. Share this story with someone who knows that the most dangerous people in the room are almost always the ones you never see coming. Your next story is already waiting on screen. Go watch it now. We'll see you tomorrow.